If you knew that every moment of your life had already been written in a book, would you live it any differently? This isn't just a question, it's a doorway into something ancient and terrifyingly beautiful. Somewhere atop a mountain wreathed in fire, a man stands barefoot, breathless. Before him, an angel of the Lord, not with a sword, but with a scroll. Unrolled, already written. This is no prophecy. This is record. A record of every year, every week, every hour since the world first opened its eyes. It is called the Book of Jubilees, not because it celebrates time, but because it commands it. A calendar not made by the sun or moon, but set in place by heaven itself. A sacred rhythm of 7 times 7 years. 49-year cycles known as Jubilees. And in each Jubilee covenants are made. Nations are judged, families are chosen, kings rise, empires fall. You've heard these names, Adam. Noah, Abraham, Jacob, Moses. But you've never heard their stories like this. Because this is not their version. It is heaven's version. You see, we tell time in minutes, but God tells time in meaning, in obedience, in mercy, in judgment, in return. In this book, given to Moses by a radiant watcher atop Sinai, we see not just the events, but the appointed times. Not just what happened, but when it was destined to happen. Think about that. Your choices, your trials, your joys were not accidents, but appointments. Does that comfort you or disturb you? The Book of Jubilees is not mythology. It is the divine clockwork behind the Bible. It reorders Genesis and Exodus into a living, breathing timeline of divine order. A time when Enoch walked between dimensions, when angels wept over mankind's corruption, when Noah received a covenant not just of survival but of calendar. When Abraham shattered idols not just with stones, but with sacred schedule. And above it all, a law older than Moses, older than Sinai. A law that Adam himself once followed. Sabbaths, festivals, offerings already known before they were given. Time in this book is not a backdrop. It is a character. It obeys, it rebels, it is redeemed. And now, so must we. Because if you are listening to this now, it is not by chance. It is time. Time to align yourself with what was always written. Time to recognize that your days are not wasted but counted. Holy. So walk with us through the Jubilees, through the sacred cycles, through the weeks of wonder and the seasons of silence. Let the ancient order speak again. Let heaven's calendar turn its page and find your name written in it. If this is your first time stepping into Scripture's hidden rhythm, if your heart stirred at the thought of time itself being holy, then don't walk this path alone. Subscribe to Verse and Wisdom, where sacred time meets present soul, where stories are not just told, but remembered. Because time does not pass, it fulfills. And your Jubilee has come. There is a rhythm beneath the chaos, a silent cadence older than kings, deeper than empires. It does not count hours. It keeps Jubilees. The Book of Jubilees reveals something almost unbearable, that time is not a river. It does not flow. It circles. It returns. It obeys. At the heart of this vision lies a sacred unit, 7 times 7 years. 49 years. A Jubilee. Every Jubilee is a full turning of God's calendar. Each one begins not with a trumpet, but with remembrance. It marks the moment when heaven and earth realign. It is not just a number, it is a covenant. Creation began with a week. Not an accident, but a blueprint. 6 days for building, 1 for stopping. 7 days, then 7 weeks, then 7 sevens. The rhythm is embedded in the bones of the world. Why? Because obedience is not just moral, it is chronological. The Jubilee calendar is not just sacred, it is synchronized. And in this sacred calendar, the events of Genesis and Exodus don't just happen, they are appointed. Adam is formed in the first week. Enoch is taken up in the 12th Jubilee. Noah receives the covenant in the 21st. Abraham's trials unfold at exact intervals, not vague decades, but specific weeks of years. The Exodus itself, the defining moment of Israel's freedom, doesn't just fall into history. It erupts in a set jubilee echoing the release that the Jubilee law later commands. That law in Leviticus declares, "In the 50th year, proclaim liberty." But Jubilees shows us God was doing that long before Israel heard it. He freed Abraham from Ur. He freed Jacob from Laban. He freed Joseph from prison, all on time. Not our time, his. And that is terrifying, because it means that God is not reacting to events. He is unfolding them. You are not improvising your story. You are stepping into its appointed hour. This view of time shatters modern thinking. We believe in progress, a timeline marching forward. We believe the future is unwritten and we write it with our will. But what if the future is not blank? What if it is waiting? In Jubilees, time is not random. It is moral. There are seasons when repentance is easier, and seasons when rebellion festers. Not by chance, but by design. Time itself rewards or resists us, like a servant faithful to the master's clock. And what happens when we lose that clock? Chaos. That is the warning embedded in this book. Because when people forget the cycle, they forget the covenant. When they forget the weeks, they forget the God who wove them. And in forgetting him, they lose themselves. The flood came because the weeks were broken. The Tower of Babel fell because men tried to make time serve them. Sodom was destroyed not in an era of ignorance, but in a jubilee of willful forgetting. But those who remembered were remembered. Noah, Abraham, Jacob. They didn't just obey God, they obeyed time. They knew there were windows, seasons to build to flee to return. They walked in step with a calendar written in fire. And now so must we. Because time is not the ticking of a clock. It is the echo of Eden, calling us back. Not all calendars are created equal. Some mark time, others shape destiny. In the Book of Jubilees, time itself becomes a battlefield. Not just a backdrop to human events, but the very ground on which obedience stands or falls. At the heart of this battle lies one critical number, 364. That is the true number of days in a year according to heaven. Not 365, not 354, but 364. It is perfect. It divides evenly by 7. It preserves the Sabbath. It ensures that every festival, every appointed day falls on the same day year after year, jubilee after jubilee. This is not just mathematics. It is worship. Because time in this divine rhythm is not merely counted. It is consecrated. And in this consecration lies rebellion, not against God, but against chaos. The nations around Israel followed the moon. Their calendars drifted. Their holy days slipped. The Sabbath wandered, and with it, so did their hearts. To follow a lunar calendar meant uncertainty. A new moon might rise early or linger late. Feasts could fall on different days, diluting the meaning, confusing the people. Jubilees calls this out. It names the danger plainly. When the calendar drifts, the covenant drifts with it. This was not a small issue. It was a spiritual infection. Because when sacred days are lost, sacred memory follows. And without memory, the soul forgets its shape. So God gave his people a gift, a year of 364 days. Unmoving, unshifting, unshakable. And by doing so, he offered them something far more than a calendar. He offered them alignment. To keep this calendar was not just to know the date. It was to agree with heaven. To say, I will not let culture shape my time. I will not let kings or markets or moons determine my rhythm. I will move when you say move. I will rest when you say rest. This was radical. It still is. Because to keep 364 is to defy the world. It is to mark your days by divine architecture, not human convenience. It is to say, There is a time for everything, but not just any time. There is a time appointed, and it is not ours to choose. In Jubilees, the calendar becomes a kind of temple, invisible, but real. Step off the dates and you step outside the sanctuary. This is why the book grieves. It sees that Israel, in forgetting the calendar, will forget the covenant. Their feasts will become fog, their Sabbaths scattered, their sense of belonging broken. It's not because God changes, it's because the people no longer know when He speaks. And so the 364-day year stands not as superstition, but as resistance. A rebellion of reverence, a protest of precision. To follow it is to tell the truth. Time is holy. Time must be guarded. Time can be lost. And if lost, so can we. So count carefully, because the days are not yours. They never were. Not all calendars tell the truth. Some drift, some deceive, some erase the divine rhythm altogether. But in the Book of Jubilees, time is not left to human guesswork. It is revealed precise, unbending, sacred. 364 days. That is the number appointed by heaven. Not 365, not 354, exactly 364. Why? Because 364 divides cleanly by 7. It protects the Sabbath. It holds the weeks in place. It ensures every holy day returns again and again on the same appointed day. This isn't about astronomy. It's about alignment. A lunar calendar, by contrast, stumbles. The moon shifts. It shortens months. It lengthens years. It pulls the feasts out of season and scatters the Sabbaths across a moving target. And when that happens, when sacred days become uncertain, faith becomes fog. In Jubilees, the danger is clear. Calendars are not neutral. They carry theology. They shape memory. When a people follow the wrong time, they lose the right story. The nations around Israel followed the moon. They offered sacrifices on days God did not appoint. They danced at festivals out of rhythm with creation. Their worship, however sincere, missed the mark. But Israel was given a gift, a calendar of constancy, a system not built on cycles of darkness, but on the unwavering pulse of 7. To live by this calendar was to resist, to say no to Babylon's time, no to Egypt's moons, no to Canaan's drifting days. And that resistance was holy. Keeping 364 was not easy. It demanded observation, vigilance, trust. It meant being out of sync with the world, but in sync with God. It meant letting heaven dictate your days. Each festival, each offering, each season of repentance or rejoicing fell exactly where it was meant to fall. To alter that was to alter covenant, because these were not just days. They were appointments, divine meetings written before the foundation of the world. And when Israel forgot, they fell. Not simply because they sinned, but because they sinned on the wrong day. The Sabbath slipped, the Passover wandered, the harvest festivals clashed with wrong moons. And in the confusion, so did the people. They forgot not only what to do, but when. And slowly the songs faded. The rhythm broke. That's why Jubilees grieves. Because the loss of time is the loss of identity. But the righteous remembered. Noah knew the correct year for the altar. Abraham kept the exact day of circumcision. Jacob marked the feasts while wandering the land. They kept the 364, even before Sinai, even before Moses. Because truth was not given at a mountain, it was embedded in time itself. So what does this mean for us? It means our days are not ours. They are borrowed, assigned, holy. It means that to follow God is not just to walk in His ways, but to walk in His time. And that is the challenge. Because we live in a world that pulls us away from rhythm, away from stillness, away from the sacred. But you can return by remembering the days, by honoring the calendar, by resisting the drift. Because in every moment you are being asked, will you keep my time? Will you wait for my hour? Or will you follow the moon? Obedience did not begin at Sinai. It began with time. Before the tablets, before the commandments were carved into stone, the sacred law was already alive, written into the rhythm of the days. Abraham kept it. So did Noah and Enoch before them. How they did not have the 10 Commandments. They did not have the priesthood. They did not even have a nation. But they had the calendar. And in that calendar, they knew when to offer, when to rest, when to wait, when to move. It was not written in scrolls. It was whispered in the weeks, imprinted on the heart of the faithful. In the Book of Jubilees, this is more than a detail. It is the foundation. Because long before Moses climbed the mountain, men were already walking in step with heaven. Enoch knew the appointed days. He wrote them down and entrusted them to angels so that future generations would not forget. Noah, after the flood, built his altar at the right time, the first day of the first month, a date chosen not by instinct but by design. Abraham was told to circumcise Isaac on the 8th day. Not the 7th, not the 9th, because timing is covenant. Jacob, while in exile, remembered the feast of first fruits. He counted the days, prepared the offering, even in a land that did not recognize it. This kind of obedience has nothing to do with geography. It has everything to do with time. It says, "Though I am far from the land, I am near to the rhythm. Though I am surrounded by strangers, I will not forget the calendar." This is what God honors. This is what angels record. Because they do not only watch what we do, they watch when we do it. An offering given early is disobedience. A Sabbath skipped is not just rest missed, it is time broken. Jubilees shows us that time is not blank. It is assigned. Every day has a character, a destiny, a weight. And when we live out of sync, we tear at the fabric of holiness. This is why the calendar matters, because without it, even righteousness becomes random. We may fast, but not on the fast he has chosen. We may celebrate, but not on the feast he has appointed. We may mean well, but miss the mark. Jubilees returns us to this truth, that obedience is not just about what, but when. That to honor God is to submit not only our actions, but our hours. That holiness is not only moral, but temporal. And that every act of faith has a time stamp. A time when it was offered, a time when it was rejected, a time when it was fulfilled. And heaven remembers them all. So what does this mean for us? It means that our calendars are spiritual weapons, or spiritual traps. They either align us or scatter us. They either draw us toward the holy or away from it. So we must ask, am I in rhythm with God? Do I know the season I'm in? Am I moving with Him, or ahead of Him, or behind? Because obedience is not simply about doing the right thing. It's about doing it in the right time. So now you know that time is not merely a frame for obedience. It is part of obedience itself. That God does not just command what He appoints when, but if time is sacred, what happens when it begins to unravel? What happens when the cycles of blessing are broken and the appointed days fall into silence? Then time does not simply pass. It becomes judgment, and the world begins to fall out of tune. This is where our story turns, from the order of days to the hearts of those who kept them and those who did not. He was not the strongest, not the eldest, not the most righteous in the world, but he was ready. Abraham was not chosen randomly. He was chosen on time. In the Book of Jubilees, his calling is not a surprise. It is an appointment, a sacred hour foretold before he ever drew breath. He was born in the 21st Jubilee in the 7th week in the first year. Not a general era, but a precise line on heaven's calendar. Because Abraham was not just a man, he was a moment. He descended from Eber, the one who preserved the true name of God when others abandoned it. The world was falling again. Nations wandered, idols multiplied. Time itself began to blur. But from the house of Shem, a remnant remained. And Abraham still called. Abram was the hinge on which the sacred timeline would turn. The Book of Jubilees does not introduce him with sentiment. It places him in the calendar. It marks his life with days and weeks and years, Because everything about Abraham was tied to sacred time. At the age of 14, he began to question the idols of Ur. He watched the sun rise and set. He saw the moon's phases, and he realized these are not gods. They obey cycles. They cannot create, only repeat. So he turned his heart toward the one who sets the cycles. This was not just faith. It was discernment of time. Because in that very year, in that very Jubilee, God's voice was preparing to break silence. At age 60, Abraham rose and destroyed the idols in his father's house. He did not wait for a sign. He acted in rhythm. Then the angel of the presence appeared. Not with mystery, but with history. He reminded Abraham of the weeks, the seasons, the law of the seventh day, the appointed times of offering. This was not a new religion, it was a return. And Abraham understood. The world around him danced to false calendars, feasts of fertility, lunar sacrifices, festivals of confusion. But heaven was singing another song, and Abraham listened. He departed from Ur, not just geographically, but chronologically. He stepped into sacred time, into a pattern, into a calling that had waited not for a man, but for a moment. He crossed into Canaan at the turn of a week. He built altars at the new moon, not in honor of the moon, but in honor of its creator. He did not bring chaos with him. He brought order. Because he was not inventing faith, he was recovering it. And heaven responded. Each of Abraham's movements is recorded with astonishing precision in Jubilees. The year, the week, the day. Because obedience in this vision is not just spiritual, it is temporal. He did not become righteous because he believed. He became righteous because he believed on time. And in doing so, he reopened the covenant, the one made with Adam, preserved through Enoch, renewed through Noah, now sealed again through Abraham. But Jubilees make something clear. This was not Abraham's achievement. It was his alignment. God had set the moment. The cycle was ready. The hour had come. And Abraham stepped into it. In the world's eyes, he was just one man leaving his home, wandering without direction. But in heaven's eyes, he was a fulfillment, a note in the symphony, a breath in the liturgy of years. And from that breath, a nation would be born, not just of blood, but of time. He had no tablets, no mountain, no cloud of fire, no priesthood, no written law. And yet Abraham kept the commandments. This is one of the great revelations of the Book of Jubilees, that the law was not born at Sinai. It was remembered there, long before Moses, before even Joseph. Abraham knew the statutes. He walked in them. He kept them. He taught them to his household. Because the law was older than the nation. It was embedded in creation itself, carried by angels, revealed to the faithful, and passed on through time. Jubilees tells us plainly Abraham kept the Sabbaths. He observed the feasts. He gave tithes. He honored the appointed days down to the day of the new year. Where did he learn these things? Not from scrolls, not from tradition, but from heaven. He received instruction directly from the angel of the presence, a divine messenger who unfolded for him the calendar of the Most High. The true year, the true days, the rhythm of obedience. This is not mere devotion, it is precision. Abraham's righteousness was not just moral, it was temporal. He knew when to act, when to offer, when to rest, when to move. And in knowing the time, he fulfilled the will of God. This destroys the false idea that the law was invented for Israel. It was not. It was revealed to them, yes, but it had existed since the beginning. It was the law Adam abandoned, the law Enoch preserved, the law Noah revived, and the law Abraham embraced. This is what made him the father of many nations. Not simply because he believed, but because he embodied a life in step with sacred time. But then came the test. Not a test of knowledge, not a test of sacrifice, but a test of timing. God told him to take Isaac, his beloved son, and offer him on a mountain. Not immediately, not someday, but on a specific day at a specific place in a specific week of years. This is what most forget, that the test was not just if Abraham would obey, but if he would obey on time. He rose early, he prepared the wood, he brought 2 servants, and he climbed the mountain, not knowing how the story would end, but trusting the time. At the appointed hour, he bound his son. He lifted the knife, and the angel appeared. Do not lay a hand on the boy. Why? Because Abraham had already offered in his heart, in his steps, in his timing. He had not hesitated. He had not delayed. He had kept the faith in rhythm, and that rhythm echoes still. Because in that moment on that mountain, a greater covenant was being written. Not in stone, not in fire, but in sequence. A father offering a son. A substitute provided. A promise renewed. All on time. And this is the mystery of Jubilees, that time is not only a frame for obedience, it is the medium, the canvas, the unseen altar on which all true worship rests. And Abraham knew this. He did not invent worship, he remembered it. He did not receive a new law, he restored the ancient one. He did not blaze a trail, he walked a path set before the stars were hung. There are covenants written in words, and there are covenants written in blood. But the covenant of Abraham was written in time. The angel came to him again, not with new commands, but with appointments. A sign was given: circumcision. On the 8th day, not the 7th, not the 9th, because even the mark of the flesh had to follow the calendar of heaven. Abraham obeyed, not because he understood, but because he trusted the rhythm. He circumcised Isaac, his household, every male under his roof on the appointed day. Not a moment late, not a moment early. And heaven sealed the covenant. Jubilees records the date down to the year, week, and day. Because in this vision, to be God's people is not only to be marked, but to be synchronized. Time itself becomes a sign, a badge of belonging, a measure of loyalty. But even in that moment, the angel did not promise ease. He gave a prophecy that Abraham's descendants would stray. They would abandon the appointed times, forget the holy weeks, twist the calendar, celebrate on days never commanded, ignore the days that were. They would live out of rhythm and reap the cost. And yet, a remnant would remember. A people not of might, but of memory. They would search the old books. They would study the ancient cycles. They would recover the 364. They would restore the feasts. They would walk in step again, not because they were told, but because they had heard from the beginning. This is the hope that pulses through Jubilees, that even in forgetting there will be remembering. Even in drift there will be return. Even in exile, a way back to the calendar. And through the calendar, back to the covenant. Because the covenant is not just about belonging. It is about alignment. Abraham's life was not special because he was first. It was special because he was on time. He moved in rhythm. He trusted the appointed hour. He stepped into the sacred story exactly when it opened to receive him. And that more than blood, more than law, more than land, is why he was called the friend of God. And now the question returns. What time is it for you? Have you stepped into your appointed hour? Or have you lost the rhythm? Because the covenant is still waiting. The days are still turning. And the calendar still sings. Will you remember? If this message stirs something ancient in your soul, if you feel the calendar of heaven tugging at your heart, then join us. Subscribe to Verse and Wisdom, where we walk not just in faith, but in sacred time. Because the days are not passing, they are fulfilling, and one of them is yours. But what happens when those born into the covenant? Forget the calendar. But what happens when those born into the covenant? Forget the calendar. Jacob remembered. He walked with a limp, but his steps were in rhythm. He built altars not just in places, but in seasons. He named wells, he counted days, he followed the weeks of the ancestors. He told his sons of Sabbaths. He marked the days of mourning. He buried Rachel at an appointed time, and blessed Joseph with a vision not just of greatness, but of timing. Because Jacob knew destiny without schedule is danger, but his children, his grandchildren. They would walk into Egypt and slowly forget. At first, they remembered the seasons. They honored the day of harvest. They passed down the stories of the weeks. But years passed, then decades, then centuries. The Nile whispered louder than Sinai. The moon's pull drowned out the calendar of heaven. And time, holy time, began to break apart. They still believed, they still prayed, but not on the appointed days. They worshipped when Pharaoh permitted. They mourned on Egyptian fasts. They rested according to the market, not the commandment. The rhythm was gone, and with it, their clarity. Because when the calendar breaks, identity follows. They became a people of pain, not promise. A people of slavery, not sequence. Jubilees grieves this silence. It records the years not just in numbers, but in ache. The descendants of Jacob became strangers to their own days. They no longer knew when to sacrifice, when to stop, when to listen. And so they drifted. They still bore the mark of Abraham, but they had lost his clock. And in heaven's eyes, this was not just tragedy, it was disorder. Because when sacred time is abandoned, so is sacred covering, and the covenant begins to dim. Yet even in Egypt a flicker remained. Levi remembered. He taught his sons. They kept the feasts in secret. They whispered the Sabbath in the corners of their homes. A calendar hidden like a lamp under a bowl. The Book of Jubilees tells us even in bondage a remnant kept the weeks. A handful of faithful measured their mourning by the days of Noah. They marked the 7th month with silent prayer. They counted the years waiting for the sign. And in the 400th year, on the very day foretold to Abraham, a child was born. Moses. He was not just born into history. He was born into prophecy, into timing. Because deliverance does not come when we are ready. It comes when the time is fulfilled. Moses did not rise early. He rose on schedule. His mother hid him for 3 months. The same span of time that Noah waited as the waters began to recede. Pharaoh's daughter drew him out in the same season that Jacob once journeyed back to Canaan. And when Moses fled to the wilderness, he waited not by despair, but by appointment. 40 years. Because silence too is part of the calendar. And then, on the mountain, at the appointed hour, the voice returned. Not new, not strange, but ancient. The voice of the calendar. Calling Moses not just to lead, but to remember. Moses did not speak quickly, but time spoke through him. He was not chosen because he was eloquent, but because he was born into a sacred delay. 40 years in the palace, 40 years in exile, 80 years of preparation for a mission measured by weeks. The Exodus was not a reaction, it was a rehearsal. A sequence set in motion before the Nile ever rose before the Hebrews, ever wept before Egypt, ever enslaved. In Jubilees, Moses is not just a liberator, he is a fulfillment. He rises not with surprise, but with schedule. The burning bush did not burn randomly. It blazed at an appointed hour, a day marked in heaven for return, for remembrance, for reckoning. Let my people go. It was not just a cry for freedom. It was a summons back to the calendar. Because Egypt had done more than enslave Israel's bodies. It had corrupted their clocks. Their days were Pharaoh's, their months followed the moon. Their weeks bowed to the market, their feasts forgotten. And God said, no more. He sent Moses not just to split a sea, but to reset time. Tell the people this month shall be the beginning of months. A new year, a new cycle, a new covenant. Freedom without rhythm is chaos. So God gave them rhythm first. Before the plagues, before the staff, before the Red Sea. He gave them a calendar. On the 10th day, take a lamb. On the 14th, slaughter it. 7 days, eat unleavened bread. Precision, sequence, sanctity. Because deliverance must be remembered, and memory without timing fades. The first Passover was not just an event, it was an appointment. The angel of death passed by not at midnight, but at exactly midnight. Because judgment too keeps time, and those who obeyed the clock were spared. Their doorposts marked not just with blood, but with obedience to the hour. Jubilees treasures this moment, not as myth, but as metronome. It was the moment when Israel stepped back into sacred time, and God said, "You are mine again." But time must be protected. As they crossed the sea, the weeks began to count. 7 weeks to Sinai, 49 days to covenant. The giving of the law was not spontaneous. It was preordained. Just as the world was made in 6 days and sealed with a 7th, so the law was given after 7 sevens. Because the law is the rhythm of creation restored. But even here, time would be tested. The people grew impatient. Moses delayed on the mountain. The calendar stretched. Their hearts snapped. They built a calf. They held a feast. They danced. But not on the appointed day. Not with the appointed joy. Their celebration was out of time, and it was judged. Because worship, when untethered from schedule, becomes idolatry. Moses returned not just with commandments, but with correction. You have sinned not only in what you made, but in when you made it. The covenant was almost lost again. But mercy is also measured. And God, who counts the days, offered restoration. But only if they would learn to count again. Freedom is fragile without memory, and memory fades without rhythm. So when Israel left Egypt, God did not merely lead them out. He led them into time. At Sinai, He did not only give commandments, He gave a calendar. Feasts, Sabbaths, weeks, Jubilees. Each law was not just a rule, it was a rhythm, a heartbeat for a nation being reborn. You shall count 7 weeks. You shall rest on the 7th day. You shall remember the 1st month. Jubilees shows us. The covenant at Sinai was not only about morality, it was about measurement. Because righteousness is not abstract. It has dates, it has cycles, it has a schedule. When Moses received the tablets, he also received the architecture of time. The people were not just to obey, they were to align. Every feast served as a correction, a course reset, a call to remember. Passover said you were spared. Unleavened bread said, you were rushed. First fruit said, everything belongs to me. Weeks said, wait for my spirit. Trumpets said, wake up. Atonement said, repent. Tabernacles said, rest in me. Each one fell on a precise day. Each one carried a weight of memory. Each one kept the nation in rhythm, but the danger never left. Even with the law in their hands, their hearts could wander. And they did. They added new feasts. They forgot the old. They mixed the holy with the familiar. And slowly their calendar began to fracture. They still worshipped, but not always on the right day. They still offered sacrifices, but not always at the appointed hour. And the more the calendar blurred, the more their covenant faded. Jubilees does not shy from this truth. It warns, a people can possess the law and still lose the rhythm. That is why time is not a suggestion, it is a covenant. And to break the calendar is to tear at the heart of holiness itself. Moses knew this. Before he died, he wrote the law again. Not just the rules, but the timing. He told the Levites guard the calendar. Teach the weeks, mark the years. Do not let the feast days drift. Because once they drift, the people follow. And exile begins not when land is lost, but when time is forgotten. So Moses blessed them and wept, because he saw ahead. He saw that Israel would forget again, that kings would rise who honored the moon, that prophets would cry against false festivals. He saw the temple fall. He saw Sabbaths trampled. He saw the calendar collapse. But he also saw a return. A people broken and scattered would one day look back. They would study the weeks. They would count the days. They would recover the rhythm. And the covenant, the one made with Abraham, renewed through Moses, sealed in blood, and time would beat again. Because God's time is never truly lost. It waits, like a song paused, like a seed buried, like a bell still echoing in the soul of the faithful. But what happens when even the keepers of the covenant begin to mark the wrong days? When priests forget the weeks, when kings move the feasts, when the people no longer ask, "Is this the appointed time?" Then time does not bless. It begins to judge. There is a kind of forgetting that happens slowly, silently, almost politely. It does not shout, it does not rebel, it simply drifts. And this is how time begins to die. After Moses, Israel inherited not just a land, but a calendar. They were given fields and feasts, seasons of sowing and seasons of rest. Every 7th year, the land itself was to breathe. Every 50th slaves would be freed. Time was not just for humans, it was for the earth, for justice, for mercy. But the people forgot. Not all at once, but one feast at a time. One Sabbath skipped. 1 year not released. One ruler who changed the schedule to suit his throne. And so the drift began. Jubilees watches this with grief. Because this book is not just history, it is lament. It records how Israel began to lose the time. And with time, they lost clarity. They celebrated the Passover, but not always in the spring. They kept the Day of Atonement, but sometimes a day too late. The calendar, once precise, became political. Priests argued over moons. Kings aligned festivals with foreign powers. The people grew confused, and heaven grew silent. Because the rhythm had broken. And when time breaks, so does revelation. Prophets came, but their warnings fell into disordered ears. "Return to the Sabbaths," they cried. "Count the weeks again. Restore the appointed days." But who was listening? The market had taken over. The sun and moon were no longer signs, they were instruments of trade. Even the temple, the very house of sacred time, lost its pulse. Sacrifices continued, but not at the correct hours. Priests still offered incense, but not always on the right days. The calendar had become a costume, an echo of something once true. And so judgment came, not out of nowhere, but out of schedule. Because God had warned them, if you forget the Sabbaths, the land will evict you. If you forget, the Jubilees, captivity will follow. And it did. Babylon, exile, silence. Not just the silence of land, but the silence of time. The weeks were no longer counted. The feasts were not kept. The sacred clock was shattered. And the people, even those who still believed, didn't know when to mourn, when to pray, when to hope. They still cried out, but the days had lost their names. And in heaven, the angels grieved, because each appointed hour that passed unobserved was a door unopened, a gift rejected, a memory unclaimed. Even when time collapses, some still remember. Even when the calendar shatters, some still count. They are not the famous, not the rulers, not the high priests in golden robes. They are the hidden ones. A father who gathers his children at twilight and tells them, "Tonight begins the week of the vision." A mother who lights a lamp on the old day of remembrance, even though her village has forgotten it. A widow who fasts alone because she remembers the day Enoch was taken. These are the faithful, the scattered, the silent. And heaven knows them by name. The Book of Jubilees does not speak loudly about them, but it honors them. Because they preserve the rhythm of holiness when the nation no longer hears the beat. They cannot restore the festivals, not yet. They cannot rebuild the temple. They cannot fix the priesthood. But they can wait. And they do. They count the days. They mark the weeks. They remember the 364. Even while the world spins to the sound of foreign moons, they listen for the pulse of the ancient days. And in their homes, in their whispers, in their little acts of fidelity, the covenant still breathes. One of them writes the calendar again. He copies it by hand. He hides it in a jar. Another teaches the names of the sacred weeks to his son, though the synagogue no longer does. Another walks the fields at sunset, not for labor, but to greet the Sabbath. They remember not out of tradition, but out of love. Because memory is the soil of the covenant. And when no one else keeps the times, their obedience becomes intercession. It is their prayers that rise at the appointed hour. It is their tears that fall on the night of atonement. It is their hearts that burn with the question, when will we count rightly again? And God sees. He counts with them. He listens for the sound of remembered weeks. And in the heavens, the angels record. Not crowds, not spectacles, but single moments when a soul kneels at the right time. A prayer whispered on the old day of offering. A silence kept on the original Sabbath. These are the offerings that restore the altar. Because even when there is no temple, time remains holy. Jubilees tells us there are always a few who know the weeks. They are not perfect, they are not powerful, but they are faithful to the rhythm. And that rhythm will one day call them together. From east and west, from exile and obscurity, they will rise. They will recognize one another by the calendar they kept. They will count together. They will sing the old feasts. They will restore the order. Because what is remembered will be reborn. This is not nostalgia. It is prophecy. A calendar kept is a covenant preserved. And a covenant preserved is a people not yet lost. So even now, even in confusion, even in noise, even in disarray, heaven waits for those who remember. Some days are more than moments. They are mirrors. They are altars. They are questions. Among all the days that Israel forgot, none was more sacred or more dangerous than the Day of Atonement. Yom Kippur, the 10th day of the 7th month. Not chosen by men, chosen by God. Etched in the calendar before the law was even spoken. This day was not made for celebration. It was made for honesty. No feasting, no dancing, only fasting and silence. It was the day when the high priest entered the most holy place. Alone. With trembling hands he carried the blood of the sin offering. Not just for himself, but for the people. And the angels watched. Because this day was a test of alignment. If the high priest entered on the wrong day, judgment. If the incense was offered at the wrong hour, death. If the ritual was changed, rushed, reversed, the veil would not open. Because mercy is holy. And holiness has rhythm. But as generations passed, this day, like all the others, began to bend. Some changed the date. Others changed the meaning. It became a tradition instead of a threshold. A symbol instead of a summons. And the heavens grew silent again. But there were still a few who remembered. They fasted even when no priest entered. They prayed even when the temple was gone. And in those prayers the day lived on. Because atonement was never about location, it was about time. Atonement does not wait for a temple of stone. It descends at the appointed hour to those who are ready. And when the hour is forgotten, atonement waits. Jubilees reminds us, God established this day not only for Israel, but for all generations, forever. Because there is something in the heart of man that needs a reset, a time to name the failure, a time to carry no pretense, a time to be empty before the presence. And God, who counts the days, still counts this one, even now. So if you feel the weight of unfinished things, the ache of misaligned time, the hunger to come home, then remember the day is still marked, the rhythm is still there, and the covenant still calls. Perhaps this is your appointed hour. If this story stirred something within you, if your soul feels out of sync but still longing, then walk with us. Subscribe to Verse and Wisdom for stories that echo the eternal calendar. Because time is not just passing, it's pointing, and maybe right now it's pointing to you. There are books in heaven, not of ideas, not of doctrines, but of days. The Book of Jubilees tells us every moment is recorded. Every action, every omission, every hour. Not just what we do, but when we do it. Because to heaven, timing is truth. From the beginning, God appointed angels to record the lives of men. The angel of the presence, the angel of the face, the watchers. They do not write with ink, they write with time. They mark the appointed feasts. They note the Sabbaths kept and the Sabbaths broken. They observe the covenant renewals and the days that passed without remembrance. This is not mythology. It is divine memory. Heaven watches the world as a liturgy, and every misstep in rhythm is noted, not in wrath, but in sorrow. Because when a people fall out of sync, they fall out of communion, and the angels record it. When Cain brought an offering at the wrong time, it was written. When Noah offered on the day of deliverance, it was remembered. When Abraham rose early on the third day with the knife and the fire, heaven took note, not just of the deed, but of the day. Because righteousness is never random. It is always timely. The Book of Jubilees is filled with these time stamps. It shows us that heaven's concern is not merely what is done, but whether it is done in alignment. Every sin has a date. Every prayer has a time. Every act of mercy has a season. And the angels write it down. This should not cause fear. It should awaken reverence. Because it means your life matters not only in substance, but in sequence. You are not drifting, you are numbered. Each choice you make echoes not just in space, but in time. And every time you remember a Sabbath, every time you bless an appointed day, every time you wait, you honor the schedule of your soul. The angels write, even now, even here. And one day those books will be opened, not to condemn, but to confirm. To show that you walked in rhythm, that you kept the weeks, that you listened for the ancient calendar, that you remembered. And in that day, the silence of obedience will become the music of reward. Every generation is entered into the book, not just as names, but as rhythms. The faithful are not remembered by how much they built or how loudly they prayed, but by how closely they walked in time. The Book of Jubilees reveals a sacred system. Each jubilee, each 7-year cycle is recorded. From Adam to Enoch to Noah to Abraham. Their lives are not just stories, they are calendars. Their births are marked, their deaths are timed, their deeds are set to sacred rhythm. This is how heaven sees history, not as events, but as sequences. Cain's rebellion was not just evil, it was early. He disrupted the rhythm. Enoch's ascension was not just miraculous, it was timely. He was taken on the day he had walked a full cycle. Noah built the ark, not when the skies first warned, but in the year heaven had predetermined. Abraham did not argue the dates. He trusted them. He rose when told. He offered when called. He kept the feast days not out of culture, but out of covenant. And now, every generation after him is measured by the same rhythm. Some aligned, some delayed, some ignored. But all were recorded. Because the book is not biased. It does not favor kings over shepherds. It only asks, did you keep time? That is the only scale by which heaven weighs nations. Not by wealth, not by armies, not by monuments, but by alignment. The prophets understood this. When Amos cried out, he spoke of moons and seasons out of order. When Isaiah warned, he condemned feasts held on the wrong days. When Jeremiah wept, it was not just for sin, but for the desecration of time. Because when the calendar is broken, everything breaks with it. But even then, even in judgment, the books remained open. And heaven kept writing, because not all forgot. A remnant always remembers. And their memory is salvation for the future. The book does not close until time itself is fulfilled. And every soul will one day read what they wrote by their steps. Your life is being written in the scroll of weeks. Not just your actions, but your timings, your delays, your obedience, your hours of stillness, your minutes of surrender. They are not forgotten. The angels are still writing. There is a moment coming for every soul, when the books will be opened, not as threat, not as spectacle, but as revelation. What has been written will be read, and time your time will speak. Not in words, but in witness. Because time is not silent. It remembers. Every day you honored, every moment you turned away, every hesitation, every act of obedience that cost you nothing, and the ones that cost you everything. All recorded, all alive. The angels are not judges, They are witnesses. They do not interpret, they document. They write the calendar you chose to live by. And if your life was out of rhythm, they write that too. Jubilees dares to show us what most fear to ask. That holiness is not just about what we do, but when we do it. That delay can be disobedience. That haste can be pride. That alignment is more than intention, it is precision. This is why the righteous are not simply moral, they are timely. They do not just believe, they listen, they wait, they act at the appointed hour. And this is what the books reveal. The calendar you kept, the days you honored, the feasts you remembered, the cycles you rejected. And yet there is mercy, because the one who ordained the calendar is also the one who redeems time. Even wasted time, even broken weeks, even lost years. Jubilees tells us that those who return to the appointed days, even late, are still welcomed. Because repentance has a time too. And when you turn back to sacred rhythm, heaven turns its page. The books do not condemn, they clarify. They tell the truth so you can return to it. So, if you feel out of step, if your life has drifted, if your days no longer feel like they belong to something eternal, take heart. It is not too late to walk back into rhythm. The calendar is still pulsing, the angels are still writing. And today, yes, today can be the first day in a new sequence. But if time is recorded, it must also be governed. If every hour is sacred, then someone must guard the hours. Who then holds the keys to heaven's calendar? Who teaches men not just the law, but the schedule? Before there were scrolls, before there were tablets of stone, there were voices, heavenly voices. And they taught not just truth, but time. The Book of Jubilees reveals a truth hidden from most. The law was not born on Sinai. It was delivered by angels. Not just once, not just to Moses, but to Enoch, to Noah, to Abraham. Each received not just moral instruction, but calendars. Because time has never been man's invention. It has always been divine revelation. And the messengers, the angels of order, the watchers of the weeks, were entrusted to teach it. Jubilees calls them the angels of the presence, the holy ones, those who dwell before the face of God. They do not simply observe time. They manage it. They guard its rhythm. They were the first to declare the Sabbaths, to establish the cycles, to assign meaning to days. And they were sent to earth, not to rule, not to terrify, but to instruct, to teach men what time means and how to walk within it. Enoch listened. He was taught the divisions of days and nights. He saw the turning of the heavens. He received the secrets of the weeks, and he passed them on. To Methuselah, to Lamech, to Noah. They kept the calendar not from science, but from angels. And so it was with Abraham. When he rose early to offer Isaac, it was not instinct, it was appointment. He knew the hour, the mountain, the moment, because heaven had told him. And in that obedience, Abraham did more than please God. He joined the rhythm of creation. This is what Jubilees dares to declare, that the law, the true law, is older than Moses. It is eternal, and it has always included the keeping of time. That is why when Moses ascended Sinai, he was not receiving something new. He was recovering what had been given from the beginning. And again the angels were present. They gave him not only commandments, but the full calendar. The Sabbaths, the feasts, the weeks, the Jubilee years. Every part measured, appointed, aligned. Because holiness requires timing, and it is the angels who keep that timing pure. So when the people drifted, when kings changed the festivals, when priests followed the moon instead of the weeks, it was not just a social error. It was rebellion against heaven's stewards. To alter the calendar was to defy those who guard it. And the angels withdrew. They stopped teaching. They stopped correcting. And the rhythm began to unravel. Not because the law was lost, but because the keepers of time were no longer heard. There is a silence worse than absence. It is the silence of those who once spoke and no longer do. When the angels withdrew, they did not leave the earth. They left the calendar. They stopped teaching, because man had stopped listening. This is the sorrow that Jubilees unveils. The keepers of time were replaced by keepers of convenience. The 364-day year was abandoned. The appointed weeks were ignored. And in their place, moon cycles, foreign feasts, dates dictated by kings and merchants. But heaven does not follow the moon. It follows the pattern. And when man rejected the pattern, he rejected the presence. The angels grieved, because they had once taught Enoch the turning of the heavens. They had walked with Noah through the weeks of waiting. They had whispered to Abraham the exact hour of obedience. Now they were exiled by forgetfulness, and in their silence confusion reigned. Israel still worshipped, but at the wrong times. They still offered sacrifice, but on unclean days. They still read the law, but had lost the clock. And the temple, the place meant to anchor time, became a stage. Feasts were moved to fit the ruler's mood. Sabbaths were bent to follow the moonrise. The priest debated the calendar not to find truth, but to win power. And the people wandered between weeks. They no longer knew when to fast, when to rejoice, when to rest. And the angels did not correct them, because correction requires humility. And the nation was proud. Jubilees mourns this drift, not with rage but with sorrow, because the angels had been faithful. They had handed down the rhythm since Eden. They had kept the weeks like flame, but man had traded them for shadows, for the moon which waxes and wanes, for the crowd which cheers and forgets. And so for a season heaven went quiet, not out of wrath but out of reverence. The angels will not force what must be chosen. They will not shout over disobedience. They wait, and they write. Because even in silence the book is open, and every misplaced feast, every shifted Sabbath, every defiant day is recorded. Not to accuse, but to remember, to hold open the invitation. Because when man repents, the silence breaks, and the angels return. But silence is not the end of the story. In every age there comes a soul who dares to listen again. Someone who looks at the sky not for signs of weather, but for rhythms. Someone who opens the scrolls not for argument, but for alignment. Someone who asks, what if the angels never left? What if we stopped hearing them? Jubilees tells us when Moses went up Sinai, he did not invent the law. He was taught it again, by angels. And when he descended, his face shone not from power, but from time restored. He had heard the original calendar. He had seen the pattern. And from that day he began to teach not just commandments, but appointments. The people listened for a while, but over generations they drifted again. And yet, in every drifting there are always a few who return. A remnant who reads the weeks, who counts the years, who marks the Jubilee not as folklore, but as compass. And when they do, heaven answers. The angels speak again, not in thunder, not in visions, but in rhythm. They stir hearts to remember the Sabbaths, to prepare the feasts, to realign the weeks. And slowly the silence lifts, because obedience opens the ears, and remembrance restores the voice. This is the great promise of the Book of Jubilees. That time, though broken, can be healed. That calendars, though shattered, can be rewritten. That what was lost in arrogance can be recovered in humility, not through innovation, but through restoration, by returning to the days first appointed, by listening to the voices still speaking, because the angels never stopped guarding the weeks. They simply waited for someone to notice, for someone like you. If this story stirred something deep, a memory, a hunger, a longing to live your days in rhythm again, then walk with us. Subscribe to Verse and Wisdom for sacred stories and forgotten calendars restored. Because your time was never meant to drift. It was meant to shine. But before the angels taught the calendar, before Moses received the tablets, before Abraham kept the feast, there was light. And in that light, a rhythm began. What if time itself was not just created, but called into being? What if the first command was not obey, but mark? The day in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. But before he formed beasts or men, before he made seed or soil, he did one thing. He divided time. Let there be light, he said. And there was morning, and there was evening. Day one, not just light, but order, a measurement, a boundary. Time began not with a sun, but with a word. And that word set the clock ticking. This is what Jubilees understands so deeply, that creation is not just space, it is schedule. God does not merely make things, he appoints their when. The plants were made on the third day, the sun and moon on the fourth, but light, pure light, was born on the first. Why? Because time comes before the instruments of time. Because God, who is outside time, chose to step into it not with a calendar, but with cadence. There was evening and there was morning. This was not poetry, it was rhythm, and from that rhythm came all life. Jubilees dares to say what Genesis only whispers, that the first act of creation was temporal. That time was the first covenant, and like all covenants, it had order. Not random hours, not wandering moons, but days measured in light. This is why Jubilees rejects the lunar calendar, because the moon came later, but light, the true beginning, was the first. And so the week was born, not in Babylon, not in culture, but in creation. 6 days of work, 1 day of rest. Not just for man, for God, because even God keeps time. And when he rested, he sanctified the day. He didn't bless the mountain, he didn't bless the garden. He blessed a day, because time can be holy. This is the foundation of all that follows. Without a sacred start, there can be no sacred sequence. Without the seventh day, there is no Jubilee. Without the first light, there is no law. So when Jubilees begins not with man, but with the rhythm of creation, it is not being mystical. It is being faithful. Faithful to the idea that holiness is measured in hours. That obedience begins with scheduling. That time is not a canvas, it is the covenant itself. And so to honor creation is not just to admire the stars. It is to keep the week. It is to mark the seventh day. To remember the pattern, to walk in the original pulse of the world. Because from the very first page, God was not just making things. He was counting. After light came the days. And God did not just create them. He counted them. First, second, third. Each day was spoken, acted, and declared. And then he looked, and he said, "It is good." Not just what was made, but when it was made. Because in the Book of Jubilees, every act of creation is a declaration of time. It is a calendar in motion, a cosmic journal. The fish were made on day 5, not before, not later. The animals came on day 6, not by evolution, but by appointment. And man was last, not as afterthought, but as climax. He was made on the 6th day of the first week of the first Jubilee. That is how precisely heaven remembers. And this matters because time is not generic. It is sacred in its sequence. That is why Jubilees gives dates to everything, not just stories, events. Noah entered the ark on the 17th day of the 2nd month. Abraham offered Isaac in the 3rd week of the 6th year of the 45th Jubilee. This is not trivia, it is theology. Because remembering God is remembering when. And so every act of faith is a reenactment. To fast on the right day is to join Noah. To bless the 7th day is to echo Eden. To mark the Jubilee is to remember that time belongs to God. Jubilees teaches us the past is not lost. It is held in the rhythm. The days we repeat are the days God wrote. The weeks we keep are the weeks He kept. And when we align, we enter memory, not just our own, but heaven's. This is why angels rejoice when the people remember, because memory is restoration. And every Sabbath kept, every feast honored, is not just tradition, it is covenant repair. Because what was made on day 1 still pulses. The light still shines. The rhythm still beats. The sequence still sings, and every soul that steps into that sequence becomes part of the original song. Man was not created to master time, He was made to dwell within it. On the sixth day, God formed him from the dust, but he placed him into a garden already shaped by rhythm. There were trees, yes, rivers, animals, but more than that, there was schedule. The garden had a direction, the days had order, and the first thing God did was rest. Not because he was tired, because the story wasn't finished until time was made holy. And he invited man into that rest, not as a suggestion but as design. Man's first full day was not labor, it was Sabbath. He opened his eyes into a world already moving, already singing, already counting. This is what Jubilees preserves, that man was not the architect of the calendar, he was its steward. Time came first. Then came humanity. And so to be human is to be scheduled, not chained, not enslaved, but harmonized. To walk in Eden was to walk in time. Each morning was not just a sunrise, it was a pulse in God's rhythm. Each seventh day was not merely rest, it was reunion. And as long as man kept that rhythm, he kept the garden. But the serpent tempted not just with fruit, but with disruption. You will be like God. No more waiting, no more timing. Take it now. And in that grasp, man did not just lose Eden, he lost his alignment. He stepped out of rhythm. He hid in the wrong hour. He covered himself before the evening breeze. He blamed, he fled, he forgot. And heaven wept. Because when time breaks, so does communion. Jubilees teaches us that the exile from Eden was not only physical, it was temporal. Adam left the garden and wandered through time. But God did not abandon the rhythm. He guarded the tree. He marked the east. He let the seasons roll on. And from that moment, he began to restore. One Sabbath at a time. One feast at a time. One Jubilee at a time. Because Eden was not just a place. It was a pulse. And to remember, it is to walk its rhythm again. But time was never meant to remain in Eden. It was meant to travel. To be carried by a people. To be kept through wilderness and wildernesses of the heart. So God gave them more than days. He gave them feasts. What happens when memory becomes celebration? God could have written memory into stone, but instead he wrote it into the calendar. He did not ask his people to build monuments. He asked them to remember the days. Feasts, appointed times, sacred weeks. This is how heaven teaches memory through rhythm. In the Book of Jubilees, these feasts are not add-ons. They are core. They are not local customs. They are divine instructions. And they begin not with Israel, but with heaven. Because the angels keep the calendar too. There is a feast for the first week of creation. A feast for the covenant with Noah. A feast for the blessing of Abraham. Each one is anchored in the heavens. And the people on earth are invited to join the rhythm. Not just to celebrate, but to align. Because these are not holidays. They are holy convocations. Appointments with God. To forget them is not just to be disorganized, it is to dishonor the covenant. Because in Jubilees, every feast is a reminder of what God has done and what he will do again. Take, for example, the Feast of Weeks. We know it as Pentecost, but in Jubilees it is older, deeper, richer. It was first kept by Noah, then by Abraham, then by Isaac and Jacob, before Sinai, before Moses, before the law was given. Because the law was always rooted in sacred time. And the Feast of Weeks is the Feast of the Covenant. It remembers the rainbow. It remembers the promise. It remembers the giving of law and spirit alike. And it is not just a festival, it is a signpost. Jubilees teaches that every generation must renew the covenant on that day, not another, not near it, on that day. Because precision is devotion, and every year it is forgotten, a page is missing from the covenant story. This is how God remembers us, by when we remember him. Some feasts are born from joy, others from fire. Jubilees reminds us not every sacred day is a celebration. Some are memorials, marked by blood, by obedience that cost everything. Take the feast of the first month, the day Abraham was told to offer up Isaac. It was the 12th of the month, a day of terror, a day of trust. He rose early, He split the wood. He said nothing. And heaven recorded not just his walk, but the date. And then when the angel called out, when the ram appeared, when Abraham named the place Y8VEH Yireh, God declared that this very day would be remembered forever. Not as a day of mourning, but as a feast, a day when faith defeated fear. And so, in Jubilees, that date is kept, not for Isaac, not even for Abraham, but for the covenant, because time remembers obedience. And every generation that walks with God must face a similar moment, a day of testing, of letting go, of lifting the knife. And those days must not be forgotten. They must be remembered in rhythm, in ceremony, in feast. Even the darkest days have light when they are kept. The same is true for the day of deliverance, the day Israel left Egypt. The 15th day of the first month, God told Moses, "This shall be a memorial for you throughout your generations." And Jubilees confirms not just once a year, but on the appointed day, because the blood on the doorpost still speaks, and the angel that passed over still watches. The feast is not the ritual. It is the remembrance. It is the joining of time with truth. And when that happens, when the people gather on the right day with the right heart, heaven opens. Because God keeps feasts too. He attends the appointments he makes. And when we show up on time, we find him waiting. The feasts are not just memories. They are previews. Every appointed time is a window into what was and what shall be. Jubilees dares to say the calendar itself is prophetic. Each cycle moves the people forward and deeper into the mystery of redemption. Take the Day of Atonement. It was not given to Israel as mere ritual. It was inscribed before the law, before the priesthood, before the scapegoat. Jubilees reveals even the angels observe it. It is the 10th day of the 7th month, always, forever. Why? Because that day remembers more than forgiveness. It remembers the breach in the heavenly tablets. It remembers the fall of the watchers, the corruption of bloodlines, the first defilement of time itself. And it looks forward to a final cleansing, to a day when time itself will be purified, when the weeks will no longer be violated, when the feasts will no longer be ignored, when the calendar will sing again. The Feasts of Booths, a shadow of the kingdom. The Feast of Weeks, a glimpse of the harvest of the nations. Even the weekly Sabbath, a whisper of the eternal rest. This is why the dates matter. Because if you celebrate at the wrong time, you signal the wrong truth. If you forget the appointed day, you step out of the prophecy. And heaven cannot agree with confusion. Jubilees tells us plainly, when the people kept the feasts on the wrong calendar, they fell under judgment. Not because of evil intent, but because time was violated. The dates are sacred. Not because they are numbers, but because they point to Messiah, to restoration, to the end of exile. And that is why every feast is holy, not for what it is, but for what it reveals. And every time we keep them with right heart on right day, we are joining in the revelation. We are stepping into prophecy. If you've ever felt that time holds deeper meaning, that the calendar of God is more than ritual, subscribe to Verse and Wisdom for stories that remember and days that prophesy. Because the dates still speak, and they're waiting for you. But not everyone wants the calendar restored. Not everyone welcomes the rhythm. Because where there is sacred time, there is always an enemy of time. One who distorts, one who delays, one who rewrites the weeks to erase the witness. Who would do this? And why? Not every rebellion comes with swords. Some come with calendars. The Book of Jubilees reveals a deeper war, not for land, but for time. Because whoever controls the calendar controls memory. And whoever owns memory shapes identity. From the beginning, there has been opposition to sacred time. The Watchers. Those angels who fell did not just corrupt bloodlines. They corrupted the seasons. They taught man to follow the moon, to shift the weeks, to mark time by the stars instead of by the word. And man listened. Why? Because lunar calendars are seductive. They follow beauty, not obedience. They move, they glow, they change. But sacred time is fixed, stable, rooted in the first light. And so when man adopted the moon, he began to drift. And that drift was not innocent. Because soon feasts were off. Sabbaths were missed. Weeks became guesses. And the covenant grew faint. Jubilees dares to say this was no accident. The calendar was targeted on purpose by powers who understood its power. When Antiochus outlawed Sabbath, it was not just oppression, it was strategic. When Rome shifted the dates, it was not just politics, it was war against sacred rhythm. And today, the same war continues. The world moves by fiscal quarters, by market cycles, by lunar festivals with no covenant. Even among the faithful, the calendar is often forgotten, replaced by convenience, by tradition, by culture. But heaven still holds the original rhythm, and the angels still mark the true weeks. The enemy's goal has not changed. He cannot stop redemption, so he disrupts the rhythm. He cannot erase the covenant, so he buries the calendar. Because when you forget the appointed times, you forget the one who appointed them. And slowly, quietly, you begin to live without rhythm, and then without memory, and then without identity. And that is the true exile. Not from land, but from time. Not every feast that bears God's name is His. Not every Sabbath kept on paper is kept in heaven. Jubilees opens our eyes to a painful truth. That corrupted time leads to corrupted worship. Because when the dates are wrong, the meaning bends. The cycle breaks. And soon, the feast becomes empty. The Day of Atonement, kept on the wrong day, is not atonement. It is theater. The Feast of Weeks, celebrated by moonlight, is not covenant renewal. It is noise. This is why Jubilees insists on the 364-day year. Because the weeks must remain whole. 52 weeks, 7 days each, a full cycle without drift. But man loves drift. It gives power to the priest, to the politician, to the one who gets to declare today is holy. And so, in the days of the Second Temple, the calendar fractured. Some followed the moon, some kept the sun, some waited for sightings, others trusted scrolls. And in that chaos, truth weakened. Because if the people cannot agree on the day, they will soon disagree on the meaning. Unity collapses, the covenant dims, and heaven withdraws. Not in anger, in sorrow. Because the days still mean something. The appointed times have not moved. It is man who has shifted. And in the shifting, the feast becomes a form, a hollow ceremony. The people gather, but heaven does not. The songs are sung, but the angels are silent. Because God does not move His feast for our convenience. He meets us where He told us He would be. And if we are late, we are alone. This is not cruelty, it is clarity. Because sacred time is not flexible, it is faithful. And those who keep it must be too. But not all drift ends in destruction. Some end in return. Jubilees does not end in despair. It ends in invitation. Because even after the calendar was broken, even after generations wandered through wrong weeks, a few began to listen again. They searched the scrolls. They measured the days. They remembered the 364. And slowly, quietly, they began to count. Not as protest, as longing. They weren't trying to be different. They were trying to be aligned. And heaven noticed. Because even one soul who keeps the feast at the right time is enough to stir the angels. Jubilees calls these people the righteous remnant. They don't rewrite history, they recover it. They don't demand obedience, they walk in rhythm. And their lives become testimonies. They light candles on the true Sabbath. They gather on the appointed day. They teach their children not just what God has done, but when He did it. And in that remembering, a new restoration begins. Not loud, not televised, but real. Because time is the altar. And when we bring our lives to the right hour, the fire falls. This is the secret power of the restored calendar. It doesn't just inform, it transforms. It aligns hearts with heaven's memory. And when enough hearts align, revival becomes inevitable. Not because of emotion, because of obedience. This is the hope of Jubilees, that even in exile, even in confusion, even when the moon misleads and the world mocks, God is watching the weeks. And He is waiting for those who will watch with Him. If you feel that call to walk not just in belief, but in alignment, subscribe to Verse and Wisdom and walk the forgotten calendar with us. The weeks are still turning. Let's turn with them. But what if your weeks were not just watched, but written? What if every feast missed every Sabbath, kept every moment forgotten or remembered, was recorded, not in history, in heaven? Because the angels still write. There are books beyond this world, not made of paper, not bound in leather, but living records kept by angels. Jubilees calls them the tablets of heaven, and they contain more than laws. They hold time itself, every week ever lived, every Sabbath kept or broken, every covenant honored or ignored, written, preserved, unchanging. The angels are not merely watchers, they are scribes, appointed to record the rhythm. From the beginning, they have kept track of days, of deeds, of alignment. And their writings are not symbolic, they are precise. When Abraham circumcised Isaac, they wrote it. When Noah built the altar, they recorded the date, not just the act, the hour. Because in heaven, when something happens, is as sacred as what happens. This is why time matters, not just for scheduling for judgment. Because when the day comes, the books will be opened. And it will not be a list of sins. It will be a rhythm report. Were you aligned? Did you keep the feast on the day appointed? Did you remember the Sabbath? Not just in heart, in time. Because obedience is not abstract. It is measurable. And heaven measures in weeks. This is not legalism. This is faithfulness. Because the angels are not looking for perfection. They are looking for remembrance. For signs that you are listening. That you still believe time belongs to God. And every entry on the heavenly tablets is a testimony. Not against you, but about you. It says, this one walked in rhythm. This one returned. This one remembered. And one day when judgment is passed, those records will speak. Not in accusation, but in affirmation. Because your weeks are not wasted. They are witnessed. In the courts of men, evidence is words. In the courts of heaven, it is weeks. The Book of Jubilees shows us something terrifying and beautiful, that our lives are reviewed in rhythms. The tablets are opened, the dates are revealed, and what matters is not just what you believed, but how you walked in time. Did you honor the Sabbath? Did you forget the Jubilee? Did you observe the appointed days when heaven waited for you? This is not bureaucracy, it is intimacy. Because God remembers you by your rhythm. Not by volume of prayer, not by number of sacrifices, but by when you obeyed. There is a line in Jubilees, quiet, easy to miss. All their days are written before the Most High. All their days, even the wasted ones, even the ones you regret, even the days you wandered. And yet, they are not written to shame you. They are written so you can return. Because remembrance begins with record. And when you know that heaven records, you begin to live differently. Not out of fear, out of awe. Because suddenly a Tuesday is not just Tuesday. It is an entry. It is a page in the book. And when you choose to realign, when you repent, when you mark the week as holy again, the angels don't erase the old line. They write a new one beside it. This one turned. That is the power of the record. It captures not just the fall, but the rise. Not just the drift, but the return. And on the day of judgment, when the books are opened, there will be two witnesses, your weeks, and the one who walked them with you. But what if you are not just being recorded? What if you are called to record? Jubilees reveals a startling truth, that the keeping of time is not only angelic, it is human. From the moment Adam was expelled from Eden, God began to teach man to write. Not just laws, but weeks. Not just history, but holy sequence. Noah, after the flood, did not just build an altar. He began a calendar. He marked the 17th day of the second month. He remembered the covenant of the rainbow, and he passed it on. Abraham did the same. He taught Isaac, Isaac taught Jacob, and Jacob taught Levi. Jubilees tells us that Levi was entrusted with the records. The priesthood was not just about sacrifice. It was about time. Because sacrifice only has meaning on the right day. And Levi kept the days. He recorded the Sabbaths, the Jubilees, the feasts. And from him came the scribes, not merely scholars, guardians of rhythm. This is your inheritance, not to rewrite time, to recall it, not to change the calendar, to carry it. You may not be a priest, but you are a keeper of days, of memory, of sacred sequence. And every time you open a journal to mark a feast, every time you light a candle on the true Sabbath, you are writing with heaven. Your house becomes a scroll. Your life becomes a witness. Because God is looking for scribes, not famous ones, faithful ones. Those who remember what the world forgets. Those who write what heaven still holds. And every such act, small, quiet, forgotten by men, is read by angels. So now you know. The calendar was never just a tool. It was a voice, a rhythm, a witness, a covenant. And if every moment is still being written, then maybe the next line belongs to you. What if your weeks were holy? Not your years, not your lifetime, just your weeks. What if every 7 days you could start again? Not because of ritual, but because that's how God built time. Jubilees doesn't offer escape. It offers return. A return to the rhythm, to the memory, to the covenant. Because the world will forget. But you can remember. And in that remembering, you change everything. The Book of Jubilees is not just a document. It is a doorway into how time was meant to be lived. Not in stress, not in drift, but in sequence, in blessing, in rhythm. You were not made for endless days. You were made for appointed ones. And those appointed days are waiting. The Sabbath still speaks. The feasts still call. The angels still write. And heaven still watches the weeks. So what will your records say? Did you align? Did you remember? Did you mark the days as holy? Or did you let the calendar be rewritten by convenience? There is still time, not to change everything, to change the rhythm. Light your candle on the true seventh day. Break your bread on the true appointed feast. Mark your journal. Mark your soul. Because when you return to the sacred rhythm, you return to Eden. And Eden, as Jubilees reminds us, was never just a place. It was a pulse, one that still beats, one that still calls. Thank you for watching. May your days be written on the tablets of heaven. May your weeks sing again with light. And may the God of time bless every moment you choose to remember him. Shabbat Shalom. And peace. From Verse and Wisdom. If this series awakened something in you, like if you've felt the rhythm, comment what part made you pause. Share with someone who's searching for time that matters. And subscribe to Verse and Wisdom for stories that don't just inform, but transform.